everybody, and welcome to Creator Toolbox, the show that is brought to you by the ServiceNow Developer Program, where we demo the brand newest ServiceNow features for every developer's toolbox. My name is Lauren McManamon, Senior Developer Advocate, and today I'm joined by the phenomenal Riya Kapoor, our inbound product manager over a lot of the things concerning flows on ServiceNow. So, welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. In this video in particular, we are covering a whole smattering of improvements that have made in the Yokohama release concerning aspects of flows, right? We're going to be diving into a couple of different things. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to you. And you're going to jump straight into what our first topic is of the day, which are this concept of saved triggers. So kind of tell us what that is about. I'm very excited to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. I'll just give like a brief intro about myself as well. So, hi, I'm Riya. I'm from the product team in workflow automation, and my area of focus include triggers as well as Flow Debugger. So, as Lauren mentioned, we'll talk about saved triggers today, and it's a new product that we have launched in Yokohama release. Uh, just before moving forward, I would like to flash the safe harbor notice. If anyone is not aware about it, this presentation may contain some forward-looking statements that are based on our beliefs and assumptions as of date of this presentation. So yeah, just moving forward, we have saved triggers. Starting off with a very basic definition of what is a trigger. So it's like an event that happens in your system that initiates a workflow. So defining a trigger is also the very first step of building a flow or a playbook. But for low code users, it often is a very overwhelming and complex task, as they have to start off by choosing one of 7,000 tables, understanding their schemas, and then defining conditions. It already sounds too complicated for someone who's a low code user. So
Yeah,
we
so for example, some of the triggers that you might be familiar with are like when an incident is created, or they can also be time oriented too, right? Like the first Monday of the month at 8 a.m. But
yeah.
those were traditionally kind of like the only types where something was created, updated, or time oriented. But this is something new.
Yeah, yeah. So in the first release, we are supporting the record-based triggers. As you mentioned, we have the created, and updated. We are also launching a new trigger type called external trigger. So that would be something that we talk about as we proceed forward in the presentation. So this is like a brief about uh, what are the existing triggers we have in the system, and about saved triggers. So it's just a way for users to pre-create their triggers and just pick up a pre-created saved triggers and flow in one single click without having to get into the complexity of defining their trigger definitions again and again.
So, for the sake of developers, right, oftentimes they're creating flows that might be related to the same cause. So, it also helps developers kind of recycle.
Mhm.
Also, I'd never asked this question before, but if flows use the same saved trigger, if
Mhm.
you change the saved trigger, does it affect all the flows that use it?
That is correct, and I'm planning to demo the same on how we are handling this situation. If And it's just a way for them to easily manage everything in one single place instead of going to each and every flow which has the same conditions or the trigger definition and editing it again and again. They have an option now to just edit it at one single place, and the changes would be affected everywhere, wherever the save trigger is used in the flows.
We'd love to see that.
Yeah, so this was like a brief. I can deep dive into the demo.
So one quick question I have also before begin is this something that users themselves can test on personal developer instances? Like, is that available on the developer PDIs?
Yes, so this is like a platform feature. If you have access to Workflow Studio, you will have access to triggers, save triggers as well. So starting off with how we can access it, we have given like a shortcut in the navigation menu itself. If you type in triggers, you can see a direct link to triggers. If you open it, it will directly open the triggers tab in Workflow Studio. So along with our other tabs like flows, subflows, actions, we have a new tab for triggers. and the users can click on new, select trigger, and get into creating their saved trigger.
Very cool.
Yeah. And for this demo, I'll create a simple trigger called P1 incident created. And here I can select my trigger type. As I mentioned in Yokohama release, we are working with the record-based triggers and a new trigger type called external trigger that we talk about in the next section. So
Little
yeah,
teaser for what's to come.
yeah. So just selecting created over here, I can add in my description, select the additional properties. So this is very similar to how you create a flow. So all of
Hmm.
the properties are similar to that. And once I configure this, I click on build trigger and get into this trigger definition page. So all of the fields are also very similar to what we see while we are defining a trigger in Flow Designer. So starting
Mhm.
off by choosing a table. Uh, so I for this I select incident. I can configure my conditions. So just choosing one condition, that priority is P1, so critical. So yeah, just taking our focus to the new two toggles we have over here. One is allow users to view conditions. So this is
Mm.
turned on by default. The idea of having this toggle is that if there are complex conditions that the admin doesn't want the delegated developer or a low-code developer to bother about, they can completely like choose to hide the conditions altogether. The users can just pick up pre-saved triggers and go ahead with making their flow. So just hiding all of the complexity, giving an option for that. And the second toggle we have is allow users to add additional conditions. So right now the users are able to add conditions over here, but we also allow them to add some extra conditions on top of their saved triggers in Flow Designer. So if the admin doesn't want the low code users to add that, they can totally just turn off this toggle, and only the saved trigger definition would comply. They would not be able to customize it or add extra conditions on top of it.
So essentially, that toggle basically turns this into kind of like an object oriented entity where they inherit the trigger, but they could add customizations that wouldn't affect the parent. It would only affect the trigger in that specific flow, correct?
Correct. Correct.
Very
That
nice.
Yeah. So just these two customization options on your trigger definition, and along with that, we have some advanced options. So these are also the same ones that are currently available in Flow Designer, and we have the same default values as the ones in Flow Designer, and the users can choose to change them based on their use cases on whatever they want. And yeah, once they're satisfied with their trigger definition, they can click on publish. I would also like to highlight that we have autosave here. So just being consistent with all of our builders, and you don't have to again and again click on save or bother about losing your changes that you are making. We have undo redo, so any changes that you want, you don't have to go back and forth for it. So both of these options are available in saved triggers.
Now, one little thing I see on that tab up top is that it says global, indicating that this trigger exists, I assume, in the global scope of ServiceNow. Do triggers, are they, can they be existing as part of a specific scope, or will they always be a global entity?
They can be of a specific scope. So we
Mm,
selected the application scope while we were doing the properties. So I just
gotcha.
selected global, but yeah, you can totally see the scope over here in the properties menu as well. Although it is not editable, but users can definitely, while they are starting to create their trigger definition, they can choose a custom scope that they want.
Lovely.
And yeah, so we have the trigger definition created, and now I'll go ahead and publish this. So my trigger definition is active and it's successfully published. Now I can go to any flow. I've just created one for the ease of this demo. So just like any flow that you create from scratch or a existing one, you can click on add a trigger, as this is the very first step when you start off by creating a flow. I would also like to mention that users can still create triggers on the fly, that like they usually do. So if I click on created, I can still create my trigger, which is like specific to this flow, like I have currently been doing up till the past release. The only additional option is that now I don't have to bother about creating it over and over again. I can choose my application spoke where I saved my trigger definition, and I can just click on P1 incident created. So just like that, in one single click, I'm ready to go and add in more actions and go ahead with making my flow.
Now, I love seeing this. Again, I love seeing aspects of recyclable entities in Flow Designer. And as a power user of Flow Designer myself, or I guess now called Workflow Studio, excuse me, one thing that I love about one of the later versions of Workflow Studio is the ability to select multiple actions and then turn those actions into a subflow. Is there a similar aspect to a trigger? Like if I build a trigger in while I'm building my flow, and then I think to myself, that would have been really good if I had built that as a saved trigger. Can you do that within the flow itself, or is that somewhere in the upcoming backlog?
Yeah, it's coming in the upcoming releases. But once you are creating your trigger, we'll have an option to save your trigger. So you can just click on that save icon, and just your trigger would be a saved trigger, and you can go ahead with making your flow. And in the other flows that you use in the future, you can just pick up the saved one. So you can directly save it from this interface as well, without like specifically going into the saved trigger UI and then saving it. No worries. So I just wanted to showcase the editing experience to the users one. So yeah, if there is a change in business requirement, you can click on edit trigger, and probably just add in, if I want to add in like a new condition that says active is true. I make this change, I click. So I'm already using this particular saved trigger in this flow, and I've saved this flow with the changes. And after making this change, if I click on publish, it would indicate me that this is the flow that is using your saved trigger. So if I click on, yeah, so if I click on this link, it would take me to the flow directly, where I can assess whether I need this change in this particular flow or not. If I choose that I don't need this change in this flow, I can choose to click on this option called detach, and it would detach from the centralized trigger definition. So I won't get the centralized updates, whatever I'm making here in that particular flow. So that's an option we wanted to give to users, and make it easy for them to have saved triggers as like a new way of creating their trigger definitions faster. And yeah, and having an option of not getting the updates if they would not like to.
One thing I like the most about that too is it showed what state the impacted flows was in as well. So you would know like if you're impacting something that is living on prod once you push it, right? Versus something that might be still in construction and draft, which might not be as of big consequence. But how nice to have the ability to detach it. So that way the ones that you don't want to have the trickle down effect, you could have them remain independent and not have to rebuild the trigger just because you changed the parent. How nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. I'm glad you included that. That's really nice. That's really cool. Very
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I would like to ask is um, obviously building flows and things like that is traditionally a bit more of like a low code type of role, right? You don't necessarily have to know
Mhm.
the ins and outs of coding or JavaScript to build flows.
Mhm.
But obviously, like creating recyclable triggers, while it is similar in theory, that kind of the ability to have the forethought and organization
Mhm.
requires maybe like a little bit of training. Are there any resources that people can use to get comfortable building these triggers?
Mhm. Yeah, we have the documentation, product documentation of it, which mentions uh, all of the steps of creating a saved trigger. So I think that would be like a really nice resource for anyone who's starting out. And the whole idea of it is to empower low code users so that they can easily, in a very low code way, manage and create all of their triggers. So I think product documentation would be a great resource for anyone starting out.
Perfect. Well, I'll be sure to link those product documents in the description of this video down below. So please be sure to check that out if following along with the video is not sufficient. One last question for this entity. Why is this important to developers? I kind of have an inkling myself, given how much I've used Flow Designer and now Workflow Studio in the past. But
Mm.
where can you see this really making the biggest impact
Mhm.
on a day to day basis in their working lives?
Mhm. I think this is very important for someone who's handling volumes of flows. So anyone who has like same trigger conditions across flows and having to manage each one of them if there is a change in business requirements, and going and updating each of the flows just for a small trigger condition or anything that changes based on the business requirement. I think this would be a really great place to just handle your all of your triggers in one single place, edit it at one place, and having the updates at all of the linked flows. And in the future, we also plan to expand this to playbooks. So, similar to flows, the very first step of a playbook is starting off with a trigger. So, the saved trigger entity that you have can be used across flows as well as playbooks. So, yeah, expanding that recyclable element to all of the Workflow Studio products.
Awesome. Well, that was fantastic. That's usually its own entire Creator Toolbox type of episode, but you also have another fun thing to showcase today, which is external triggers as well, something also very unique to Yokohama, correct?
Now we can move to the next one, that is external triggers. And it's a new trigger type that we have launched in Y+1 release. And we'll uh, probably we can head into the demo for it.
Obviously, the last thing we just saw was demoed live, but with external triggers, there's the element of kind of hard coding a couple of elements. So she has actually done the extremely beneficial thing of pre filming a lovely demo. So let's dive straight into that video now.
Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about external triggers, a new feature that we added as part of Trigger Designer in Y+1 release. Starting off with the problem, the current inbuilt triggers which are present in Trigger Designer or Flow Designer have limited capabilities and do not cover all the possible scenarios. For example, integrating with third party endpoints for webhook based use cases requires custom scripting, making it complex and less accessible for non technical users. The solution: introducing external triggers. External triggers eliminate these limitations by enabling seamless integrations with third party application without the need of any scripts in a very low code way. An example use case could be when an incident is created in Jira, automatically trigger an approval flow in Flow Designer. In Y+1 release, the MVP of this feature is released with out of the box endpoints, and the supported spokes are Jira, GitHub, DocuSign, e-signature. In Zurich, there would be a capability for the customers to create their custom endpoints, and there would be more spokes available to the list. Before we begin the demo, I want to highlight the use case that we'll be covering. That is, create when an issue is created in Jira, trigger a flow in Flow Designer. And before we begin, also want to highlight the roles required, subscription required, and the plugins required for this feature. Let's get into the demo. We are on the Workflow Studio page, which has a new tab for triggers. This lists all the pre-saved triggers that can be used in Flow Designer. The user can click on New and create their own custom pre-saved trigger. The user can define a name for their trigger. I'll be writing down new issue created in Jira. And whenever the basically the idea is whenever the new issue is created in Jira, I want to trigger my flow. The type of trigger would be event webhook for this scenario. Just as a description, I can write in whenever an issue is created in Jira. I select the application to be the Jira spoke, and the event source that is out of the box is pre-selected for me. And I click on build trigger. Here, I land upon the trigger definition screen where I can see the event source details. I can click on view full details and look at the authentication details and other additional details of my event source. In the next section, that is the parser section, I can define the trigger output, that is all the pills that are incoming from the external third party. I can define the request headers or the query parameters for any additional information. For output, I'll be defining this as output, and I can type in any label, but just for the convenience, adding in this output here. In the next section, we have the body parameter, that is the JSON body parameter coming from the third party application. For this demo, I've pre-copied it and I'm just pasting it here. Once I have the JSON body that I copied from the third party application, I can click on visualize objects. This basically converts all of the script into a more readable format. I can look at all the data. I can choose to drag and drop the objects for my convenience and more better formatting. The next session, that is the condition, can add a layer of condition on top of data that is coming from the third party. All of the pills here are coming from my parser section, including the output, header, parameters, and the body section. I'll add a condition that says that summary contains, for example, let's do test, or let's just select a pill. Let's select the status name. Let's do issue fields and the status name. So whenever the summary contains the status name, which has a predefined word called test, I want to add this condition. And I also want to add another condition that says I want that my issue status name is to do. So here I have defined in two conditions. One that says that summary contains my status name, and the second one says that my status name is to do. If, along with the successful trigger definition, two of my conditions are satisfied, only then my trigger would run the flow. So I can save and publish my trigger definition. So I can save it for any of the changes that I have done, and I can choose to click on publish, which publishes my trigger definition. You can now use it in Flow Designer as the banner says. I can go to Workflow Studio, click on new and create a new flow. I'll type in the name as new issue in Jira flow and click on build flow. Here I can click on select a trigger, choose the right application spoke. So for me, it's the Jira spoke, and I can click on the saved trigger that I just created. So we'll choose the new issue created in Jira. For any low-code user who is on Flow Designer, they need not get into the complication of creating this huge trigger, huge and complex trigger. They can just come to Flow Designer and choose a pre-saved trigger from here. They can also choose to add more conditions on top of what is already coming from the pre-saved trigger definition. Just selected this pre-created saved external trigger and click on done. The users can add any logic to the flow. For this demo, I'll just add a log to see that all the things are working fine. Jira flow. I'll click on done. Here I click on save and I activate my flow. Now all of my setup is all done. I have used my pre-saved trigger in a flow as well, and my trigger definition is in place. Now let's go to Jira and test all the things are working fine. Here in Jira, I click on create to create a new issue. As you can see, the status is already selected to as to do, and I'll add the summary as test to do. So this is the exact condition that we have added in our trigger definition. Here, yeah, we selected that the summary contains the status name, and the status name is to do, and we had test as the prefix. So for the summary, we have added test as the prefix and to do, which is the status name, and we'll select create. As soon as this issue is created, as we can see the success message, let's see if our execution has run or not. Let's go to the execution logs and refresh this. As we can see, the top execution new issue in Jira Flow is complete and it has ran successfully. So this was the short demo for external triggers integrating with third-party endpoints for webhook-based use cases. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. That is so exciting. So now not only do we have the ability to create flows as a result of local ServiceNow changes, but also as the result of external things happening, whether they are in GitHub or Jira, or I believe it was DocuSign was the last one. I like how you targeted GitHub as one of the first ones. That'll make a lot of our developers happy.
Mhm.
But one question that I had is, what made you kind of land on those first couple of three to prioritize for these external triggers?
Mhm. So, in the first release, we were just looking at the volume of integrations based on the spokes that the users are using in. So, we had these three major ones in the first release, and the idea was to ship out of the box events for these three spokes. But in the upcoming release, the users would be able to create their custom endpoints as well for any spoke that they have in their system. So we would have some more upcoming spokes and event sources for those spokes, but the users would also be able to create their custom ones. So yeah, just wanted to start off with the MVP and having all of the volumes of spokes handled in with the endpoints. But in the upcoming releases, we would have an option to create a custom source for any of the spokes available.
Fantastic. Because obviously you could kick off flows externally before, but all of it had to be handled like with multiple different types of scripts and things like that. So having
Right.
this is kind of taking like the activity, or excuse me, the action approach from Workflow Studio of kind of taking something more technically complex and bundling it in a very nice wrapper that anybody can deploy and use. So I
Mhm.
love the kind of that aspect of deployment for these external triggers as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, like you had said, the custom ones are coming, Zurich and beyond. Again, don't make any purchasing decisions based off of that information. Safe harbor as always. But if people were looking to get more comfortable with the available external triggers for Jira, GitHub, and DocuSign, is there also documentation available for those?
Yes, definitely. So for external triggers, all of the documentation about how to create a saved external trigger in Workflow Studio, we have product documentation for it. And yeah, I'll make sure to send you the link of it.
Fantastic. Now, I have one final question with regards to these external triggers. Um, is there anything delegated development wise to enable them for certain types of scopes or keeping them out of others? Like, for example, if you don't have, like, if one application should more than is more than happy to use these GitHub integrations and one isn't, is there a certain way to kind of prevent them from that cross scope privilege?
Mhm. Yes. So if you are in a particular spoke, you will only be able to see the saved triggers in that particular spoke. So if you don't have the access to another scope, you would not be able to see the saved triggers there, and would also not be able to create the saved triggers in the other spoke. So you need to have the spoke of that particular application installed in your instance.
Perfect. And one kind of final thing, is there any, obviously knowledge is on the horizon, so is there any content being planned out by your team or the adjacent teams regarding any of this, regarding Workflow Studio as a whole that you're aware of that people can get excited for?
Mhm. So we are planning to present debugger in knowledge. So I think that is something that users are very excited about. And yeah, for safe triggers, I think we presented some of it in the last knowledge, and there was a lot of excitement around it and having external triggers as well. So yeah, this year's knowledge focus is more towards debugger, but definitely anything related to external triggers, if someone wants to know about it, happy to present it out there as well.
Awesome. Well, that seems like a perfect transition as well to today's final topic, which is the Flow Debugger. So I'll let you kick things off and describe what this new element is.
So yeah, Flow Debugger, again, it's a new feature that we have released in Yokohama, and I'll start off with like a simple use case. If you're a developer building a flow and something doesn't work as expected, debugging becomes a task of frustrating guesswork and also involving tedious log reviews and trial and error adjustments. Flow Debugger is here to eliminate that pain with the ability to set breakpoints, navigate between them, step in and out of subflows. It empowers flow authors to pinpoint issues faster and troubleshoot more effectively. Uh, I can totally dig more into the demo and showcase what we have as part of the MVP release in Yokohama.
We're thrilled to see it. That's so exciting.
Awesome. So I have like a pre-created flow for this demo. I would like to bring our attention to the top navigation bar. So along with the test button, we now have a debug button as well, where the user can click and select their trigger input. So any trigger inputs, very similar interface to how you get into the test execution. So just selecting a trigger input, clicking on debug, and it opens my execution view in the debug mode. So here the users have the ability to set breakpoints at any of the flow steps that they would like. So for example, setting up breakpoints at the points that they feel could be more problematic and they want to dig more deep into it. So if I set breakpoints at certain points in the flow, and I can also choose to like add remove breakpoints at any time while I'm debugging. And another thing I want to bring our attention to is the top navigation buttons. So these include resume, step over, step into, step out, and skip all breakpoints. So these are very similar to the debugging uh, tools that we get in the other standardized debuggers as well. So all of the navigation buttons are exactly the same and work as you would expect it to work. And yeah, after you set up your breakpoints at the steps you feel are a little problematic and you want to dig more into it, you can navigate between them, click on resume. That takes you to the next set breakpoint. You can check out all of your execution details, in particular, checking out my runtime values. I see if they are working as expected. If they are working as expected, I can also choose to like remove my breakpoint that I don't want to check it back again. I can choose to step over. That takes me to the next executable step, not necessarily the one where I have set a breakpoint. So I can also like dig more deep into it, see all of my details if they're working as expected, and click on resume. Again, can go to the next breakpoint. Here I see that it's a subflow, so I can choose to step in into. I'll click on this and it takes me to the execution view of this particular subflow in the debug mode. So yeah, here again, I can set up my breakpoints. I can choose my navigation buttons, same as we saw previously. Click on resume, step over, and debug my subflow as well.
Now, at a quick glance, I was about to ask, what are the biggest difference between the debugger and the execution view of any flow? But I think immediately with the addition of all the control and breakpoints, it really sets it apart. Like I remember so many times when I was testing out a flow where I would have like a renegade loop or something like that, and it was so hard to tell where things were exactly breaking. But here you can have complete control over running through the iterations of a loop, or perhaps stepping into things without having to go into the form to try and trigger the exact condition that would necessitate it following that logic path. How nice.
Yeah, definitely. And as you mentioned, getting into subflows and like the looping condition, pinpointing them. So I think the biggest, like the biggest experience and the upgrade from the normal execution view here is that for all of the complex flows or where there are a lot of nesting, a lot of subflows being used, a lot of loops being used, it's hard to pinpoint and like see where exactly is the point of error, and to even if I want to communicate it to someone, just look at that step, it's really difficult to do that, and users usually dig into the logs, and those are all JSON files, so it's very difficult to find the exact point of difficulty and error. So it's easier for them to pinpoint it in this release. So uh, setting up breakpoints and just navigating in all of the problematic steps that might have anomalies. Yeah. Uh, After I check my subflow, if I think that all of the things are working as I expected to, I can click on step out, and it would take me back to my parent flow where I can continue debugging. So it would pause at the next breakpoint that I have, and I can still continue debugging it. And the last navigation button that we have is skip all breakpoints. If I'm done debugging, I don't want to look at the next steps, I can just click on skip all breakpoints and it would complete my execution. So I can just look at all of the steps that I want. So yeah, this is the MVP release for debugger where you can set up breakpoints, navigate between them, and pinpoint your issues more faster.
Well, I think this alone deserves its own round of applause. This is a huge step forward, especially in bringing something like Workflow Studio in congruence with other developer tools that these types of developers may be using on other platforms as well. So, like, this is a huge win. One of my questions was because I bet a lot of the managers as well might be interested in this functionality.
Mhm,
Is there a way when you are publishing a flow
mhm,
to make sure that it has to be debugged first? Is this something that we can enforce in the
mhm.
deployment of flows, or is that something potentially like in the upcoming backlog, perhaps?
Okay, I think that's a great idea. We haven't yet thought about it, but
Mhm.
it's again just the same option like test. I
Mhm.
don't think that test is also enforced if you're
No,
deploying it.
it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, similar to that, it's a very same similar user flow as testing right now. So we haven't thought about it, but I think that's a great plan as well, where the user should either like be enforced to test or debug. But yeah, we'll
Hear that,
definitely.
developers? We're talking to y'all. This testing ATF as well. None of them are traditionally enforceable elements, right? Other than your own development practice. So, one thing to be mindful of as ServiceNow includes tools like this is to also build them into your development best practices as well. Like, I would absolutely include some degree of debugging be part of the publishing of any flow moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And happy to hear any feedback regarding this. As I mentioned, this is the MVP release. So we have shipped out very basic features about just pinpointing issues, setting up breakpoints, navigating between them. But we are developing on new features on it, and really looking back for feedback on what are the biggest debugging pain points that the users are facing. So probably I'll look after the comment section of this video to see if there are any major pain points that we should keep in mind.
Yes, if you happen to be testing out any of the features that we showed today, whether it was something with the triggers, external triggers, or anything with the Flow Debugger, please put them in the comments and we'll make sure these end up with the appropriate teams and BUs. And that goes for any Creator Toolbox episode. One of the nice things that we have with working with these teams directly is that we can give them your feedback as well. So of course, be kind about it, but any feedback that you might have, please supply in the comments and we'll make sure that it ends up in the correct hands. Is there any additional words of encouragement or any recommendations you have for developers concerning all these new additions to the features that you showcased today?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think saved trigger, starting off with that, it was very difficult to set up your external triggers without scripts. But now it's a very easy process, very low code way. You can do all of that. With the saved triggers, you can definitely just have everything in one single place. So easy administration, highly encourage using saved triggers so that you have your triggers in a more managed way instead of like having it scattered all across your flows. And for debugger, again, one of the best practices while you are building your flow, highly encourage using it and making your debugging process more easier and also like more intuitive. So yeah, I think that's it from my end.
Well, this has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough for joining us here today and showcasing this and preparing the videos. Like, this is one of the most well-prepared Creator Toolbox episodes. You've set the bar. I am so thrilled to have this today. That's all that we have for this episode, unfortunately, of Creator Toolbox. We had so much fun. We do have more episodes coming out, and there are some out already concerning Yokohama. So be sure to check those out at this YouTube channel, the ServiceNow Dev Program YouTube channel. Thank you so much again for joining us here today, and we hope to see you on our next episode. Have a great day.